Unit 6 Story Writing and Dialogue Writing. Unit Structure 6.0 Objective 6.1 Introduction 6.2 Story Writing 6.2.1 Think about your reader 6.2.2 3-act structure 6.2.3 An attention grabbing opening 6.2.4 Extended metaphor 6.2.5 Interesting details about setting and location 6.2.6 Editing 6.2.7 and finally record your ideas 6.3 Dialogue writing 6.4 Check your progress 6.0 Objectives to make the students aware of the art of story writing 2. To introduce the students dialogue writing 3. To prepare them to do the practice of preparing for the examination 6.1 Introduction. This unit will make learners familiar with the concept of story writing and dialogue writing. Creative thinking and creative writing involves use of imagination in an organized way. It is important to be creative in communication. We usually think that imagination means to be without restriction. However, imaginative and creative writing is planned and structured activity. Also, one can learn this skill and perfect it by practice. 6.2 Story Writing. Dear friends, as you know the syllabus, you have to write either a short story with the help of given points or a dialogue on a given topic. This unit will ensure to perfect you in writing both. Read the unit neatly and follow the hints given below. Creative writing by definition involves being creative, making things up, letting your imaginations run while writing dialogues and short stories is about being factual and objective, communicating ideas and arguments in the clearest way possible and attempting to enhance the reader's knowledge rather than their imagination. 1. Think about your reader. With creative writing, as with any kind of writing, your reader is your most important consideration. You need to know and understand whom you are writing for. If you are to do good job of keeping them interested, let's think for a moment about the kind of person you are writing for when you are writing an essay and what you need to do to write specifically for them. Teachers or university lecturers, they are going to be making your essay, so you need to answer the question effectively. They have sent the questions and they probably have a pretty good idea of how you are going to answer it. So be original and unpredictable, catch them by surprise with an unusual approach or structure. They're going to be reading many other responses to the same question, so they may well be bored by the time they get to yours. Keep them interested. They're probably going to be pressed for time, so they won't have time to read badly written passages to try to understand what you are getting at. Keep your writing easy to read, succinct, and to the point. What all these points boil down to is the importance of keeping your reader interested in what you have to say. Since creative writing is all about holding readers' interest, there must be some lessons to be learned from it and techniques that can be applied within the more limited style constraints of academic essay. We'll now turn to what these are. The three-act structure. The three-act structure is a writing device used extensively in modern writing, including for film and television dramas. These acts aren't as distinct as acts in a play, as one follows seamlessly on from another and the audience wouldn't consciously realize that the one act had ended and another began. The structure refers to a plot line that looks something like this. Setup establishes the characters, how they relate to each other, and the world they inhabit. Within this first act, a dramatic occurrence called an inciting incident takes place typically around 19 minutes into a film, involving the principal character. They try to deal with it, but this results in another dramatic occurrence called a turning point. This sets the scene for the rest of the story. Confrontation. The turning point in the previous act becomes a central problem, which the main character attempts to resolve, usually with plenty of adversity thrown their way that hampers their efforts in a murder mystery. For example, this act would involve the detective trying to solve the murder. The central character, with the help of supporting characters, undergoes a journey and develops their knowledge, skills, or character to a sufficient degree to be able to overcome the problem. Resolution. The climax of the story in which the drama reaches a peak, the problem is overcome and loose ends are tied up. This structure sounds all very well for made-up stories, but what has it got to do with the story writing? The key similarities here are: the central argument of your story is the equivalent of the main character. The essay equivalent of the setup and resolution are the introduction and conclusion. The inciting incident in a story encourages you to get to the point early on in the story. The equivalent of character development in the second act is developing your argument. So, applying the three-act structure to a story gives you something like this. Setup, the introduction. This establishes what you are talking about, setting the scene. The inciting incident could be the introduction of evidence that contradicts a common theory, or the highlighting of a central disagreement in how something is interpreted. Confrontation. You discuss the different problems surrounding the topic you are writing about. You develop the argument using various bits of evidence, moving towards an overall conclusion. The conclusion. You summarize and resolve the argument with your own opinion by coming down one side or other. Having weighed up the evidence you have discussed, you could perhaps tie up loose ends by offering an alternative explanation for evidence that doesn't sit with your conclusion. Using this structure keeps you focused on the central point and stops you from waffling, because everything you write is working towards resolving your argument. The use of the inciting incident in this first act encourages you to get to the point early on in your essay, thereby keeping the reader interested. The principles of good plot writing are centered around the connection between different events that show cause and effect, and the central tenet of the three-act structure has obvious parallels with the way in which essays work through presenting evidence in support of arguments. 3. An attention-grabbing opening. A murder mystery novel might start with the murder and then establish the build-up in flashbacks. An oft-quoted piece of advice in creative writing is to use an attention-grabbing opening. One way of doing this is to start with the flashback, which could disrupt the chronology of events by transporting the reader directly back to the midst of the action, so that the story begins with maximum excitement. In a murder mystery, for instance, the writer might skip a slow build-up and instead use the murder itself to form the opening of the novel, with the rest of the story charting the efforts of the detective to uncover the perpetrator and perhaps telling the events prior to the murder in a series of flashbacks. For extended metaphors, creative writing offers makes use of extended metaphors For example, when Shakespeare wrote the passage in Romeo and Juliet referring to it is the yeast and Juliet is the sun, he was using an extended metaphor. With this in mind, it's time to revisit a point we made in a previous article about writing more original essays, in which we argued that rather than battling on with trying to explain a complex concept in a straightforward way, it might be easier to use an analogy to convey the meaning by drawing comparisons which people find easier to understand. A metaphor is a kind of analogy, so the similarities with creative writing are strong here. In our previous article, we used the example of radioactive decay. An analogy for this is the pressure with which water escapes from a hole in a bucket. It is so exponentially just as radioactive substance decay exponentially. In both instances, the rate of a consumptive process depends on how much there is left of whatever is being depleted, which results in an exponential rate of decay. This concept is so much easier to explain using the analogy of water flowing from a hole in a bucket, as you give your reader something familiar to visualize in order to explain the concept with which they are unfamiliar. 5. Interesting detail about setting and location. Another way of keeping your reader interested is to bring your essay to life with details about setting and location, just as creative writers do. Essays can become quite dry if you focus solely on the academic problems, but you can make them more interesting by peppering them with details. This may not work quite so well for a scientific essay, but it's certainly relevant for some humanities subjects, in particular English literature, history, and archaeology. For example, an essay about the Roman Emperor Augustus could mention that he lived a famously modest lifestyle, quoting detail from Roman writers and archaeological evidence that support this. Suetonius mentions his low bed interesting because of what it says about accepted standards of Roman beds and coarse bread and cheese diet, and the relatively small and non-lavish remains of his house on the Palatine Hill in Rome back up the idea of his having lived the modest life. Incidental details like this can actually prove to be more significant than you initially realize, and you can use them to build your argument. In the case of Augustus, for example, his modest lifestyle is particularly important when seen in the context of Rome's troubled history with kings. As he gradually acquired more power and became Rome's first emperor, he had to avoid coming across as being too regal, and the little details we know about his way of life are significant in light of this. So, not only have you brought your essay to life, but you have raised an interesting point too. 6. Editing. Few writers get it right first time. Once you have written your first draft, read through it and think about whether the order of your points is optimal and whether what you have written actually makes sense. It's easy in the age of computers to chop and change. You can simply copy and paste part of your essay into another part where it might fit better, and then make minor changes to your wording so that it flows. So after you have finished editing, have a final read through and check that you are happy with wording. Don't forget to proofread to ensure that your spelling and grammar is impeccable. 7. And finally, record your ideas. Creative writers swear by having a notebook with them and all times ready to jot down any ideas that suddenly spring to mind.
అమ్మా అసలు పసికను
You can adopt the same principle for your essay writing because you never know when the inspiration will strike. Have a think about your essay topic when you are and about you will be surprised what occurs to you when you are away from your normal place of study. As you can
ఇంగ్లాండ్ అవును వేళ కాదు పెట్టానుడా
As you can see, there are more similarities between two apparently unrelated kinds of writing than you might have realized. It is, of course, possible to go too far with the creative writing idea when you are essay writing. Literary devices aren't always appropriate, and your story still needs to retain objectivity and conform to the more formal conventions of academic writing, but there are certainly techniques to be borrowed from creative writing that will help your story stand out from the crowd and give your teacher or lecturer a welcome break from the monotony of storytelling marking. 6.23 Dialogue Writing. Realistic dialogue written well can advance a story and flesh out characters while providing a break from straight exposition. Writing realistic dialogue does not come easy for everyone, though, and few things pull a reader out of a story faster than bad dialogue. It takes time to develop a good ear for dialogue, but following some simple rules and avoiding some obvious pitfalls can make a huge difference. Listen to how people talk. Having a sense of natural speech patterns is essential to good dialogue. Pay attention to the expressions people use and the music of everyday conversation by paying attention to the way people talk. Note how people can maintain conversation without complete sentences and sometimes by even finishing other sentences. Eavesdropping is not a crime, so go ahead to and listen to how people communicate with one another. Don't be 100% realistic. People talk in stops and starts and they pause with nonsense words like and her. Frequently, they talk over one another as much as you are trying to emulate realistic speech patterns. The dialogue still needs to be readable. Alfred Hitchcock said a good story is life with the dull parts taken out. This very much applies to dialogue. A transcription of a conversation would be boring and confusing, so give readers only what matters. Edit out filler words and unessential commentary that doesn't contribute to the plot in some way. Don't give too much information at once. It should never be obvious to readers that they are being fed important facts. Let the story unfold naturally. Readers can be trusted to remember details from earlier in the story, so you don't have to rush to tell them everything all at once. People who know each other leave a lot unsaid, so exposition still will be necessary to share some important facts. Break up dialogue with action. Remind readers that your characters are physical human beings by grounding their dialogue in the physical world. Such details also will break up the words on the page. It can be as simple as referencing their characters are standing on the deck of a cabin cruiser. Long periods of dialogue are easier for readers when broken up by descriptions. The same holds true for long periods of description. They need to be broken up with the dialogue. Don't overdo dialogue tags. Veering too much beyond he or said or she said only draws attention to the text, and you want readers focused on your compelling dialogue, not your ability to think of synonyms for sake. You also need to trust that readers will be able to follow the conversation without attribution after each statement when it is part of a back and forth conversation between characters, stereotypes, profanity, and slang. Be aware of falling back on stereotypes and be sure to use profanity and slang sparingly as are you risk distracting and alienating your readers. Anything that takes readers out of the fictional world that you are working hard to create should be avoided. Read widely, pay attention to why things work or don't work when you are reading. Take the time to note examples of when you are taken out yeah, of a story's action and then try to identify why. Where did you stop believing in a character? Or when did the character really jump off the page? And how did the dialogue help accomplish that? Again, note when this happens and try to identify what the writer was doing to achieve this. In other words, start reading like a writer. Punctuate dialogue correctly. The rules for punctuating dialogue can be confusing. Many writers need help to getting them right, especially in the beginning. Take some time to learn the basics. Your readers should get lost in your prose. You may have written beautiful dialogue, but you don't want the reader stumbling over it because it's hard to follow due to missing or misplaced commas. Cut to the chase. Cutting greetings and other small talk is a great place to start paring down your dialogue. If you omit all the hellos and goodbyes, you get your characters into the scene faster and allow them to start telling your story through language and action. Keep it short. Try to keep each instance of dialogue to one sentence. When you get to the second sentence, it's likely to your character has become an explainer delivering expository information instead of acting as a dynamic, believable character. Anytime you find yourself giving a character multiple sentences of a dialogue, ask yourself if there's a natural way to pull all the important information into one sentence, or see if it can be broken up and inserted into a few different places in the conversation. You can also see if another character can deliver some of the information. Let it flow. When you write the first draft of a scene, let the dialogue flow. Pour it out like a cheap champagne. You can make it sparkle later, but first you have to get it down on paper. This technique will allow you to come up with lines you probably would never have thought of if you tried to get it right of the first time. Be an improvisational actor. In the privacy of your own home, improvise a scene as Joe. You are both characters in the scene. If the two characters are in conflict, start an argument. Allow just slight pause as you switch, giving yourself time to come up with a response with each character's voice. 6.4 Check your progress. Go on, write a brief dialogue between you and a stranger who meets you in a train while traveling to a hill station. To write a short story with the points given below. First, you receive pocket money ₹1,000 from your father. Second, you are thrifty by nature. You don't want spending unnecessarily. Third, savings. Fourth, you invest in mutual funds with the help of a friend's father. Fifth, gift your father a motorbike after 4 years.